This is Mark McNeese, and you're listening to One Thing or Another, Interviews and Conversations. Welcome to the podcast. This is your host, Mark McNeese here, and today my guest is Robin Whitten. Robin is the founder of AudioFile Magazine. As editor and founder, Robin is passionate about audiobooks and the magic of the listening experience. She started AudioFile 27 years ago, starting out as an avid listener. So, Robin, how are you today?
I'm fine, Mark. Thank you for that nice introduction, but I have to add a couple years to it because it's almost 30 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. 1992. It was a long time ago.
Well, no, I'm glad you did that, and just pass that on to your webmaster.
I will. I'll go check that.
Now, a little bit of the information, the 411 on you, Robin. You're in Maine? Can you just tell us a little bit about you and your location and that?
Absolutely. We're in Portland, Maine. Lovely spot. Great for restaurants, great for visiting, and pretty good for publishing. Although we have a handful of people here, all of our reviewers are really everywhere around the country and a few international. And so we have people reviewing our audiobooks, the audiobooks, everywhere, and a lot of different points of view.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting into that. I just want to say that I have been to Portland on cruises. My husband and I go on cruises, and one of my favorite one really is to Canada, and they always stop in Portland.
Oh, nice.
So
yeah.
I have been there. Now, with AudioFile Magazine, I just had a question came to me earlier. AudioFile, obviously it's an audiophile, but how did you choose the name?
Well, actually, it's interesting because I chose the brand name in, the early 90s, 1990s. And the term audiobook was not probably the predominant use for what we now know as audiobooks. They were called books on tape or recorded books or spoken word audio, many variations. And so for a long time, I had to explain what an audiobook was, and people said, well, what is that name? That's so weird, audiophile. Don't you want, tape in there somewhere in the name? And thank goodness I was not convinced that was a good idea. I just held on to audiophile. And of course, they are recorded sound files. Audiobooks always have been. So, it has proved to be the right choice, I think, for the magazine, which started in print and has evolved to many different platforms, but with the focus of reviewing and recommending audiobooks.
Now, I want to get to your early days, but quick question: audiobook, 2 words or one?
It's one word. The convention
thank you.
is one word. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a few years ago. There was, people were doing both, and I said I like audiobook as a one word, so that's what I've always done. Now, you started out as an avid listener. What was the genesis of the magazine?
Well, interestingly, I was a listener, and I was really intrigued by the performance part of an audiobook experience. That, there was a narrator, whether it was the author or a professional narrator, making creative choices on, in every sentence, every word. It was truly a performance. And yet, when an audiobook was reviewed or talked about, and in the early 1990s, that was fairly rare. Anyway, everyone was just talking about the book. Well, the printed book and the audio book are different creatures. And, I was interested in the performance part. The director of the Portland Public Library was also an audio fan, and he and I used to talk about audiobooks and the library's collection of them. And he said, well, there's as a librarian, we depend on reviews, but there's very little being done about audiobooks. And I said, oh, well, maybe I should write a little newsletter. Desktop publishing was very new in
Mm-hmm.
the early 1990s. So I said, oh, well, I'll just write some reviews of audiobooks. Well, that's where it started. It started with 25 reviews of reviews of 25 audiobooks in a sort of a newsletter. It was printed, and it was circulated originally to librarians who were selecting for their collections.
Oh, nice. Now, do you read books as well? Are you primarily an audiobook listener?
Absolutely, of course I do. But a lot of my reading time, my free time, if you will, is devoted to making sure that I'm on top of the audiobooks that I need to be talking about. And we do a podcast of where we discuss one audiobook a day, the Behind the Mic with AudioFile Magazine, and I do 5 titles a month. So I have to be able to talk about 5 titles. That takes a lot of my reading time.
Now, you have really an extensive team there. I mean, you have the people that are your contributing editors, but you have a lot of reviewers. How did you find them?
Well, I think I recruit people when I've given a presentation at a conference. I say we're always looking for reviewers. People come to us. We have a little note in the magazine, and people that tell me that they are avid audiobook listeners. They're interested in the performance aspects, and they write well. I say, let's give it a try.
Nice. Now, how do people go about submitting audiobooks to be reviewed?
Well, we work with pretty much all of the major publishers, large and small, and we also take submissions from individual, independent publishers and authors.
Mm-hmm.
And we just need to know about the audiobook, and you can submit information to editor@audiofilemagazine.com. Tell us about the book, and that's how we find out about it. But we also scour all the book sites where new books are being talked about, and the major audiobook publishers send us all of their released audiobooks as well.
Now, with books that are submitted that you accept, do they go into a queue? How do you pair them with a reviewer?
That's the secret. They do. We do several levels of selection of which titles we want to try to get reviewed, and then I have to try to match a title with a potential reviewer. So if you don't really like mysteries, I'm not going to ask you to review one of the latest mysteries. So I'm going to try to find out. I know quite a lot about the interests of each of our reviewers, and I just try to make that pair so that and we ask a reviewer if they're interested in a title. So if they're not interested in mystery, and I've just proposed a mystery to them, they can say, no, I'll take one of these others on the list that you sent us. And so I think that we hope that it gives every audiobook basically an even chance. You have someone who has selected it, as if you've gone into a bookstore and said, "Oh, that book interests me."
Mm-hmm.
So you're not just being sent something and say, "Here, you must review this." And I think that helps.
Thank you. And as a reviewer yourself, what are some of the things that you are, well, judging, I guess would be the right word. What are you looking at? What are you listening for and looking for in an audiobook when you're reviewing it?
Well, I'm listening for, I think, primarily the storytelling aspects of the performance. And by that, I mean, I need to have the performance and the experience take me into the mind of the author in a way, and also wherever that author intends me to go. So if it's some exotic spot or some very stressful situation, a wealth of information about some nonfiction title, the author wants the reader to go there, and I expect the narrator to take me there.
And what are some of the things on the other side, on the authorial side, what are some of the things that make a good audiobook for you?
Well, I think, suspense, mystery is the top subject in audiobooks, as I think it may be also in genre, certainly the top genre in printed books. It's the suspense, the story, the what's going to happen next. What do I understand about these characters? I think there's also audiobooks are quite fabulous in the way that a portrait that has been written by an author of a character is conveyed, by a speech pattern or an attitude, an emotional attitude, which, a good narrator, brings across, not in a big way, but in a very subtle way. So when somebody is angry, they don't have to shout, but it can come across or scared or happy, whatever it is.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because one of my observations when I have worked with some narrators is to don't exaggerate. Don't get in the way of the story, and don't try to create. You're not Mel Blanc, you don't have to do these really, really big voices.
Well, I don't really want to notice the narrator in the way, I don't, and this happens, I think, with celebrities sometimes, that you keep hearing a famous voice, and, I shouldn't think about that. I should be thinking about the character that I'm listening about, whatever the story is about. I shouldn't sort of recognize that, oh, that's a beautiful voice, or, oh, that's a familiar voice. And sometimes, celebrities, that's how they use their voices. So they do it on an audiobook, which is maybe not always the best choice.
Now, I just have a few more questions. AudioFile you also offer interviews with narrators, authors, and also topics of interest too.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about those?
Well, there are author interviews everywhere. So we do author interviews, but we particularly like to do the interviews with the narrators because in audiobooks, they're the ones who are really making the magic of the experience, and they're underrepresented and underappreciated sometimes. So to learn more about them, to learn what they have to say about the audiobook art form, the process. And one of the things we've been having really great fun with is short videos made by the narrators who, we ask them about a book they've just recorded. And, in a minute and a half, maybe, they tell us something that has been important to them about doing that book, whether it reminded them of someone in their family or an experience they had, or just maybe an appreciation of the author. And those are kind of fun because they're speaking directly to the listener. The narrator, really is directing that at you as you watch it on a little video.
Now, this question, I don't know if this is a good question or not, but I wrote it down. How distinct do you think are the worlds of audiobooks and books are? Because there are some people who've never listened to an audiobook, and there are people who, for instance, someone who's vision impaired who only listens to audiobooks.
Right. Well, Mark, I think there's a lot of overlap, and there's always, there's always an opportunity for a crossover interest, where I might not be terribly interested in reading long nonfiction, long biographies, but I'm very happy to listen to a long biography. And maybe the reverse for some people. There are people that want to look up things in print that extremely difficult. And there are other people that just want to be taken away with a story. Somewhere in the middle of that, I think, is podcast listeners.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Podcasts are really very big these days. And I know that it's nice. A lot of people like to listen when they're walking or they're driving. My sister, I remember her listening to books on tape years ago in her car when she had cassettes.
Right. And they were all scattered around the floor, and you're trying to find the next one, number 4, when you need the next one in the box.
Now, what might you say to the uninitiated to encourage them to listen to audiobooks or give it a try or see what they think about it?
Well, I think certainly I would encourage someone who hasn't tried an audiobook to look for a recommendation like what AudioFile gives, and in probably the genre that you already like to read. So if you really love science fiction, then, you probably would like to try something in science fiction as an audiobook. And we have a couple different ways. Obviously, our website has loads of recommendations, but we also have in our podcast, Behind the Mic, we're talking about one audiobook each day, very briefly, 4 minutes. So, I'm recommending something today. You might not be interested, but tomorrow I have you can listen for another 4 minutes and see if I'm talking about something that you are interested in. We play a little clip. That's also a way to, if the voice and the story seems appealing, that's a nice way for someone who hasn't tried audiobooks to be introduced. Awards are also a good thing. Lots of eyes on, titles that have won awards from AudioFile, our earphone awards or the Audi Awards, which are given by the trade association, the audio publishers.
Mm-hmm. Now, Robin, it's been really nice to talk to you. How can people, what's your URL? How can people find you and get the magazine and the website?
Okay, audiofilemagazine.com is all audiobooks all the time. And our podcast, Behind the Mic with AudioFile Magazine.
Well, it's really been a delight to talk to you, and I stayed out of it. It's not about, because I'm a writer with audiobook. It's not about that. But I just think it's great. I love AudioFile, and I'm going to stay on top of it. And thank you very much. I'll send this to you when I put it out there, and you have a great day there in Portland.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Yep. Bye. You've been listening to One Thing or Another, interviews and conversations with your host, Mark McNeese, brought to you by Mark Publishing. Find us on iTunes, Amazon, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcasts.